Hello, I'm Michael Potter, Managing Director of Post Productions, and today we're talking with playwright Kari Bentley-Quinn, who wrote Prepared, the play that Post Productions is producing in June and early July of 2022. Hi, Kari.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here.
Thank you. You too. Well, virtually anyway. It's sweltering here. Is it sweltering there?
No, it's nice-ish out. Like it's cloudy and humid now, but it was sunny. It's like 70. It's not too bad, but it's going to be 90 and humid tomorrow.
Awful. Okay.
So summer just decided to come immediately, which
Yeah,
happens
with a
sometimes. So
bang. Yeah.
yeah.
All right, so prepared. We came about this collaboration with you in sort of a random way on Twitter, right?
I I'm
Do you
telling
remember
you,
how
it's
that
not the first time this has happened to me. This is what's so
happened?
amazing about Twitter sometimes, is the
Yeah,
connections that you make. Yeah.
I'm very glad that it happened though, because when we asked you to send the play, we were floored by it. We loved it immediately, and I'm so glad that we've been able to work with you and produce it. If you were to summarize Prepared in sort of a little précis, how would you summarize it?
Oh, I think I think prepared, like you mean plot wise or just like my general kind of thought about it?
Well, let's start with plot wise, and then we'll go to
Okay,
the thoughts. Yeah.
great. So prepared is about a young man who has a lot of problems and his mother is doing her best to solve them. But as she's doing her best, she keeps isolating them further and further from other people in their life. And neither of them, I don't think either of them are getting the help that they need. And so things just keep getting more intense. And she's bringing things like guns in the house. She's become a survivalist parent. She's divorced and estranged from her husband. She has another son with him, and they come to visit, but their relationship isn't good. And it's really just about this mother and son who are just further isolating themselves into their world until it can't sustain anymore.
It's interesting that the way you phrased it, I think highlights something that's really important that I'm hoping people get from the production, which is where the mother and Lydia and her son, who's just called the boy in the play, where they are when we meet them in the play is a result of a series of choices. But as you indicated in your answer there, the choices stem from a desire to protect, right? All of these choices come from Lydia's desire to protect and help her son, right?
That's right. I should have given character names in my plot
Oh,
summary.
it's okay.
Lydia's the mother. Trey is her oldest son. Boy is the youngest son. We don't know his name. Comes up later in the play. And Marshall is the father. So just so you have some names. But yes, it is a very important point. And yeah, it's the isolation is really something I was really honed in on.
Yeah, and the isolation is a huge part of the play right from the beginning, and our understanding of how isolated these two characters are grows and changes as the play progresses. Um, so would you say that she became a survivalist or a prepper as part of that sequence of events that stems from her motivation to help and protect her son, that this was an avenue that originally appealed to her because of her need to protect?
Oh, absolutely. I think that when you're a parent of a special needs child, and we don't really go, the play doesn't really delve into what particular kind of problem he has. I sort of left that ambiguous for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
But I think that when there's something wrong with your child that they can't quite figure out, which is the case, because there is a point in the play where Marshall and Lydia are arguing over whether or not he's autistic, and it becomes clear that they don't really have a definitive diagnosis. And I know I liken it to somebody like I had a chronic health issue, and it's, which thankfully I've been treated for, but when you go to doctors over and over and over again and trying to figure out what's wrong and no one can give you the answer, you turn to other sources. Like that's why people wind up going on the internet and getting into these, groups that are like, hey, this is what's wrong with my child. And suddenly you can find yourself in survivalist websites of people like, take your kid off the grid and take them out of public education, like they're putting things in the water, you know, and and I understand that desperation and that need to protect your child, because it doesn't seem like anybody else is doing that.
Yeah, and she certainly doesn't think that her ex-husband Marshall was really taking the boy's needs seriously and doing as much to help and protect him as he could. And that seems to have fueled her sort of dive into these conspiracy theories and fringe groups even more.
Yes, exactly. And we're seeing a lot of parallels in our society today with what's going on, where I think people are feeling unsafe and they, for whatever reason, and turn to other sources. And this is the result of what happens.
Yeah. Where did the idea for this play come from? What was the genesis of this play?
Well, I grew up in Stratford, Connecticut, which is 20 minutes or so from Newtown, Connecticut, which is where the Sandy Hook shooting happened in 2012. And so it hit really close to home. One of the teachers who got shot was, she was in my high school. I think she was a freshman when I was a senior. I didn't know her, but she still lived in my hometown, and they've actually named an elementary school after her. So it was just really one of those moments where I said, well, something's going to be done about this. And then it wasn't. And then there was a lot of attention paid to Adam Lanza, who was the young boy. I mean, he was a boy, 17 years old, who did this horrible thing. And I read a lot about him and about the very little that we know. And what was very interesting to me, and this is not an endorsement of his view, but what was very interesting to me was, from what I could glean from the things that he posted online, he viewed this as a mercy killing.
Right.
And something about that stuck with me. And instead, I didn't want to write about a school shooting, because I feel like there were a lot of reactionary and not good plays, but there were a lot of plays in reaction to that dealt with school shootings and the aftermath of school shootings directly. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to get into what I felt like we really needed to be talking about, which is what's going on at home.
Right.
With these young men who are doing these things.
Right.
And you know, what's happening to young children in general. But, you know, I mean, most of the time shooters are male, which is statistically true. And so what is the dynamic, like what's happening? And I just chose this one story that I thought maybe it wasn't exactly the same story. It's not supposed to be about Adam Lanza, but I just took these little pieces and tried to create what I thought was a very plausible scenario where something like this could happen.
Right. Yeah. You know, and I remember too, when the Sandy Hook shootings happened, having this sense that, well, surely this must be the tipping point. This must be where people take action and where we'll finally see some change and so forth. And we didn't, obviously, but also there was I remember a lot of, I think, really sincere statements around that time from people saying we really need to understand where these shooters come from and what's motivating them, what we can do in terms of intervention early on and so forth, so we can prevent this from happening in the future, which is the direction you went in. And I don't feel like we really made any progress there either. Do you think?
No, absolutely not. Well, I'm sure you read about what happened in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, young men are being groomed on the internet to be white supremacists. I mean, I don't really know any pretty way to put that.
Yeah.
And so it's gone past even just having access to weapons, you know, whatever kind of toxic masculinity or whatever religious groups or anything that they're into has gone now more in this direction. And so it's the same thing. Like sometimes it was like the incels, so they were targeting women, mm-hmm. you know, and in this case, they're white supremacists. And I mean, there's a direct line with misogyny and white supremacy are very related. So no, we're not addressing this at all. And it's a really frightening it's a really frightening time to watch it just keep happening and no one's doing anything about it. And it's not as easy as just getting rid of guns
Yeah.
at this point. I mean, it would help, but I mean, we can't get rid of guns in America. It seems like an impossible thing, but even common sense laws aren't going through. So,
Yeah. I remember presenting at a conference, I think it would have been 2016. I think it was when the campaign was underway in the 2016 American election. I presented about the confluence of, you know, what used to be separate for the most part groups, right? The white supremacists, for instance, incels, and some other groups, and how they were coalescing behind Donald Trump. And it was meant to be, the presentation was meant to be a warning that, look, these things are now coming together in a really toxic way, and we need to pay attention to this and take it seriously, because of what it means for our future. It's not confined to the United States by any means. Is really quite alarming. And a lot of people at the time thought that was so ridiculous and so alarmist.
yeah.
And then we had 4 years of just watching it happen in what felt like not just real time, but sped up time.
And as someone who's been screaming about Roe versus Wade for a decade, if not more now, I understand what it feels like to be called reactionary and overreacting and doomsday prophecy, and then to watch it all happen exactly the way you thought it would is just, it's a special kind of horrifying.
Yeah, sometimes you really would prefer not to be right.
Well, that's what people are like, oh, aren't you glad you're right? And I'm like, no, I've never wanted to be wrong. I
Yeah.
wanted to be wrong about so many things. It's not like I'm some kind of prophet. I mean, the signs are all there, right? Like, I know how numbers work. More conservative justices,
Yeah.
more likely it's going to happen. It's just math. So, you know, yeah. So it's really, it's awful, but it also is kind of like, well, we knew this was coming, but that doesn't help for some reason. You wish it would, but it doesn't really make you feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I like is that Prepared tackles these sorts of things, but not in a way that is at all pedantic, right? Or even obvious, right? It really is focused on a story, primarily the story of this relationship between mother and son. But the implications of it and the context of it address a lot of the other things that we were just talking about. Which is tricky, right? A lot of playwrights, I find, when they're trying to address these big themes, these big ideas, and so forth, it's very tempting to, you know, go the like the Aaron Sorkin route and just have somebody monologue rant for 2 pages about it, right? Was that what you were struggling with when you wrote it?
No, I wrote this play with Tina Howe when I was in grad school. She was my advisor and professor at the time. And I was in her class, and, you know, I came in with, I think, kind of the first scene was a little longer, I think, but it was kind of the first scene in the play was the first thing I wrote, which doesn't always happen with me. Sometimes I start in the middle. Sometimes I don't know, you know, I'll write a scene here, a scene there, and kind of patchwork it together. But this one kind of came in order. And I was like, yeah, and then maybe, and I was talking about like, oh, it's going to be these 4 people, but then maybe this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And Tina was like, no. This is about this mother and her son. That's what this play is about. And when she said that, instead of opening up the world, I decided to make the world smaller. And I can overwrite with the best of them. Like a lot of my plays have monologues. Like this is very sparse for me. This is my sparsest play language wise. 100%, but I feel like it almost gets more sparse as the play goes on, as they like retreat further and further from the world, which I did not do on purpose, but it sort of feels like that, like it's just more clipped or something. It's interesting what your brain does that you don't know that you're doing. But it was hard to write because I had to pull back my baser instincts to just start writing flowery monologues for mom to say, you know, just to soften it, because it's really tense and it's dark and it's, you know, I mean, there's moments of levity in it. Like I think there are some genuinely funny moments in the play. which I tend to do. I tend to do dark funny seems to be kind of in my wheelhouse. But it was just hard to keep it and make sure that everybody was still a human in it.
Yeah.
Because it was really easy. It would have been really easy to turn Lydia into a villain.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely determined not to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a lot of ways, she's the protagonist.
Yes.
But
yeah.
she just, yeah. In a lot of ways, she is, though. Very
right.
flawed.
Yeah. But she's not, I'm so glad she's not a monster, because the play wouldn't be as interesting, right?
No.
And they all of the family members feel like they are individual human beings in this particular context with this particular history. And that just makes everything more vivid and more grounded and more intense emotionally, right? I mean, it's pretty intense from the beginning, but it ramps up, as you know, steadily as the play progresses. And I think that the intimacy of it is a key part of why that works. The other thing that I was really fascinated by in the play, and you talked about how how Lydia and the boy, well, it's really Lydia making the decisions, how they become more and more isolated and from the rest of the world, even from the rest of their family. But what's interesting to me is what you start to see in the play is that their isolation has consequences for the relationship between Lydia and the boy, and that they become, as they have less and less contact with the outside world, it seems they've also become estranged and alienated from each other. And in Lydia, you see a desperation sometimes to try to close that gap and do something to correct this growing alienation, whereas the boy doesn't have those kinds of impulses so much. Was that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of. I think that boy doesn't operate in the same world as his mother in any kind of way, but it's the more she tries to trap him, trap is the wrong word, but the more she tries to close him away from people as means of protecting him, the more likely he is to lash out and behave badly. And whatever problems that he has are exacerbated by this, because he's starting to feel cagey. Because, I mean, she's even gone as far sometimes as to turn the internet off for extended periods of time. And that's his only link to the outside world. And she's desperate to have I think she's desperate to have an authentic relationship with him, and is trying to eliminate distractions so that he will give her the love that she wants from him.
There's even a line, right, where the boy tells her that she's made sure he can't leave, or something like that. Am I misremembering that?
Oh, right. Oh,
in the back.
With the line.
Yeah.
Oh, you've made sure that I don't.
Yeah.
Something, she says something like that. Yeah, it's oh, please don't leave, and he says you've made sure that I don't.
Yeah, and so there's a consciousness in him of the fact that his mother's choices have, I don't know if trapped is the right word, but maybe from his perspective it is, that they've trapped him in a certain situation, and he may feel a desperation to escape from that situation that he can't quite articulate.
Well, I think any teenage boy who's being restricted by their parents to this degree is going to feel trapped. I mean, despite all of his problems and, his inability to really function socially, he's still a teenager in a rapidly changing body with a rapidly changing brain. And, there's a rebellion. I mean, there's rebellion there. He's rebelling against this, which probably feels smothering. Yeah, for sure. She's very, she's over attentive to a fault, but he also doesn't give her a lot back.
Yeah, there's a codependency that exists between them. He does need her, and she needs him in ways that are sometimes quite toxic.
Yes, it is. It is definitely it's definitely a toxic relationship, and that's why I think I did put moments of tenderness between them, because I didn't, want it to be. There's something keeping them there.
Right. And she does love him. And you do see that throughout the play at various points. It's just that how that love manifests in terms of action, in terms of choices, is sometimes not what she'd intended. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She's doing her what she thinks is her best,
Yeah.
and is coping with the circumstances that she's been given. It doesn't mean that just because she's making some questionable choices doesn't mean that she doesn't love her child. Of course she does.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's clear to me that throughout the play that she does love him. It's just and I'm hoping that everyone who sees it will feel that and recognize that, even if they say, well, that's not how you should make choices when you love someone, but they can at least see that that is where it's coming from, right? And like you said earlier, you were really consciously making sure that she was not a monster, and she isn't. She is not a malevolent person. She's not even an
No,
indifferent person. Yeah, she's
no, she's
highly
not.
invested. She's invested in her son's future.
Yeah, she's
Yeah,
absolutely one of the most committed characters I've ever written.
yeah,
She is in it, and she is committed, and she believes that she can get him better. She
yeah,
fully believes that with all of her might. She believes that.
yeah. It's like this effort failed, but the next one might not. Now I know. Okay, I won't do that, but maybe if I try this other thing. And she's been doing this for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
What about Marshall and Trey? I mean, they're big parts of the play. Um, what role do they serve in the story?
I think Marshall and Trey are really important to the story because you get to meet Boy's brother, who could not be more different, could not be a more different person. He's just an entirely different person in every single way. It's always stunning to me. My brother and I are really different too. And we're alike in a lot of ways. And I think Trey and Boy are. I think they both have that snarky sarcasm.
Yeah,
They both have that they have a little bit of wit, both of them. So they do have some similarities, but personality wise, they're just night and day.
yeah,
Um, and Marshall, another person, it would have been very easy to just make the big baddie.
right.
Not that he behaves well. I'm not defending. He's checked out.
Yeah,
And we're seeing a family at a point where people are starting to be like, it's been a decade of this
yeah,
and nothing I do helps and I'm just checked out. And that's where he's at. That doesn't mean that he makes good decisions. That doesn't mean he handles it well. He doesn't, but you can also see that he struggles.
yeah,
And
yeah,
his kid kind of hates him,
yeah,
maybe for a good reason, but he makes no secret that he can't stand his father.
yeah, yeah. And there's also, I mean, you see moments where Marshall is kind of trying to extend an olive branch or trying to engage with the boy in some way, but it comes from a place of disconnection where you get that, since he left this relationship, he and the boy have not really had much to do with each other. And given what Marshall says before the relationship with Lydia ends, and given the fact that the boy was very young at the time, this is clearly Marshall's choice for them not to have much of a relationship, even if at this point, when the boy is around 17, he feels some regret and feels like he must make some kind of effort.
Yeah, I think definitely, I don't think Marshall knows how to handle him
Mm-hmm.
and his limitations. And also Lydia calls the shots.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And I don't I have my own idea of their whole backstory in my mind. And I do think that there were a lot of rules to follow and lots of hell to pay if rules were not adhered to exactly.
Mm.
But Marshall also works a really demanding job and works a lot of hours and chooses that's his choice, but he's also supporting them since Lydia doesn't work.
Right.
And
What?
so
Yeah.
he's providing for them.
And he encourages her to go back to work in a flashback, right? And
Yeah.
she at that point has made the decision to retreat rather than engage more with the outside world.
Yeah. exactly. It wasn't that he expected her to be a stay-at-home mom for the rest of her life. That was not the deal. The deal
Mhm.
was, when the kids are little, you can stay home with them, but then, and then she just didn't.
Yeah. And then, what you're saying about, the backstory between them, and maybe that, there were a lot of rules to follow. You get kind of a hint of that in toward the end of the play. It's not the last scene with Marshall, but the last scene between him and Trey, right? Where one of the reasons that going to strip clubs appeals to him is that there are definite rules to follow there.
Hmm.
And there's less uncertainty, and there's less left to your individual choice, which maybe being responsible for his choices in a South Korean existentialist sense kind of
Right,
terrifies him at this point.
right.
You know?
An interesting choice I made that I didn't really think about that hard until I decided not to expand the play beyond this family, this nuclear family, is that Marshall didn't remarry. There doesn't seem to be, there's not a stepmom in the picture.
Mhm.
And so that's interesting too, because when you're talking about rules and structure, he's now living a bachelor life. And
Right.
after having a wife and 2 children, you're probably used to some degree of schedule, that all of a sudden you have a lot of unstructured free time. So maybe that's why it sort of appeals to him to
Yeah.
have these places where there's structure,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like his job too.
Well, I imagine, he probably feels some degree of responsibility and guilt and perhaps shame for the way his relationship with Lydia deteriorated, that he made wrong choices as well. She did too, but so did he. And that
Hmm.
might make him a little terrified of what might happen if he were in another relationship and would have to make choices again,
Yeah,
you know?
that's completely valid.
Trey seems to me like the audience surrogate character.
He is. He is.
He's the most well-adjusted of all of them. And at one point he says, "Am I the only one who sees that something's wrong here?" And no one listens to him.
Nope.
And he makes a couple of like very sincere efforts, I think, to try to improve the situation, but he's met with nothing each time. Where did this older brother figure come from, and why is it important for that character to have this particular place in the story?
I'm the oldest sibling. So I think the oldest sibling kind of, especially if the older sibling is like high achieving and is off on their own, doing okay. Sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and that's often the younger sibling just because they're younger.
Right.
Um, so, my brother, he actually like had a terrible like misdiagnosis, but they couldn't figure out, there wasn't something majorly wrong with him. There was just something, he was like, he was a little bit more offbeat. He was very introverted, right? And I was this big flaming extrovert. And, so my parents just didn't fuss over me as much because I was fine. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? And so, as we got older, that changed, of course. But, when he was little, it was just like, oh, you're fine. So, I think that he's a big older sibling who's done well for himself, and his family is just falling apart. And he's looking at it going, is anyone going to do something?
Yeah.
No one does. And, my parents are divorced, so I've been through my own version of this sort of thing.
Mhm.
And sometimes when people are wrapped up in their own stuff, the older sibling can often take on a parental role, not only for their younger sibling, but for their parents as well. And I
Yeah.
think that's what the position that Trey is in, is that I feel like he's doing an awful lot of parenting in the play.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in the last big scene that involves all four of the family members, it seems as though he is slipping into a role he's accustomed to as the mediator, as the one who tries to
He's the
figure out what's
fixer.
going
He
on.
is the
The fixer.
fixer.
The fixer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I've been in that position, not and there's other dynamics you can wind up in that position in your life too, besides your family. And it's just, you're the person who immediately jumps into action. It's like, I got this, I can fix it. If I just talk to mom, she'll be fine, everything will be great. And you realize after a while and hopefully some therapy that it doesn't work that way, and
Yeah.
that you can't spend your life cleaning other people's messes. And so, but yeah, to see him struggle, but he is the audience surrogate because he has a much broader view than any of them do, because they're so involved, they're so mired in it. But Trey's kind of like, working and, living a young man's life, early 20s, and he has a different perspective than any of them.
Yeah.
He's not as isolated, kind of by default.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to go back to sort of the journey of the script itself. Now, you finished it, what was it, 7 years ago?
Yeah. The first draft was the end of 2014. So that's 7 years ago. No. Yeah,
Almost
7
8.
years ago. It was it was almost 8 though. Yeah, it'll be 8 in the fall, because I wrote the first draft of this play in fall of 2014 in Tina Howe's class. And then the thesis production was in February of 2015. So I've been working on this play a long time.
And it was your master's thesis, this play?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it was my master's thesis.
At what university?
Hunter College.
Hunter College, right.
Mm-hmm.
And where is that?
It's in New York. It's in the city.
Oh, okay, I know the one. Okay, yeah, I completely blanked on that.
It's part of the CUNY system.
Yes, for some reason in my head, I thought it was somewhere on the West Coast, but I have friends who are from the CUNY system, and of course, now that you say it, it's obvious to me. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. Like Hunter is one, Brooklyn College is in the CUNY
Yeah.
system. Like, there's a whole bunch.
Oh yeah, it's a huge network of universities. So is this a path that you were always on, to become a playwright? Like, how did this happen? What was your journey to being a playwright? Is that a passion you'd had since you were young, or is it something you fell into later?
Yeah, I had the playwright to actor to playwright boomerang that a lot of people do. I started writing plays really young, probably when I was 12 or 13. But I was also performing, and then I got bit by the acting bug very hard and pivoted to acting for a long time. And then when I decided I didn't want to be an actor anymore, I kind of went back to playwriting. And that's a very simplified, short version of the actual journey. But I've always been, I've been writing forever. Writing is something I've been doing since I was old enough to write, since the time I was little. But playwriting was the first thing I attempted seriously. And I think training as a performer was great for my writing. And I loved it, when I did it. It was great. It wasn't the life I wanted. So I shifted my focus to playwriting. And it went better than any of my auditions went. So, but in all seriousness, I love playwriting because you get to do rehearsal anyway. You get to work with actors anyway. You don't have to be on stage to work with actors, but
you like the process.
Yeah, I'm a process gal. I love the whole process. I love rehearsal. I get my best rewrites done in rehearsal. I'm really I love making a play with people. It's like my favorite thing to do. And it's been super fun doing this with you guys, because even though we've had to do it on Zoom, but like, you're in Canada, we probably would have had to do it on Zoom anyway.
Yeah. It's been really great for us to have you at rehearsals and to get your input. And I was wondering how that felt for you. I wasn't sure what it's been like for you. So yes, please continue. I'm very curious.
Well, it's not my first rodeo on the Zoom. My play, The Worst Mother in the World, was produced by Halcyon Theater in Chicago in 2019. I was very fortunate and able to fly out there for the first week of rehearsal, which was great. So I was in person for the first week. This was pre-COVID, when such exciting things could happen. And that was great. And also my best friend lives in Chicago, so I was able to stay with her, which made it affordable for me to do so. And then I came back to open the show. So that was super great. But in the meantime, after we were done with that first week of rehearsal, I was watching everything on Zoom. And that was my first time doing it. for that long. I'd done like little things on Zoom where it's like, oh, somebody's doing one of your scenes and then you watch it on Zoom and then you go away, but not like a whole play.
Yeah.
And I think with Zoom, I think it's just focus struggle, mostly. But the nice thing is you can be in your pajamas and then you can turn your camera off and nobody has to see your face. Because I always say to my actors, I think I said this to you guys, I was like, if it's not you, I have like the worst face, and it's usually about something I did. But I've had actors just stare at me like, oh my God, like I thought I did something horrible that you hated. And I was like, no, I was angry at myself.
Right.
So the nice thing about Zoom is you could just, while everybody's working, you know, if they're up on their feet, like for a table read, you leave the camera on, but like when they're working on stage, my camera's off. So when my face is like, oh God, what's that? Like I haven't had to make that face a lot though, I have to say. I really have not had to make that face.
Faye and I have the same problem. And when I was an undergrad, I had a professor keep me after class once, and he was really concerned. He's like, I just need to understand why you hate my course so much. And I was like, oh, I love it. It's just, that's my concentration face. I'm sorry. I don't know what to
do.
Do.
Yeah, the awareness of our own, we've just had more awareness of our own faces than I think we've ever needed to. And then, you know, I was in the Ashland New Plays Festival with my play Hyannis. And so that was all done on Zoom. The production was on Zoom. It was great, but it was 100% Zoom, which was really interesting because I had never done that before. But it was a really great experience. It's just, I mean, you miss being in a room with people. I love like when, you know, you run into each other at the vending machine or like, you know, and then you start chit chatting and then you go out for drinks after. Like, I definitely missed that I missed that communal part of it, but you still get to know everybody, and it was a really cool experience.
I was curious, you know, with Prepared and you attending via Zoom, the rehearsals, whether one thing I was curious about from the very beginning was whether from your perspective there would be any sort of cultural disconnect between what we and the cast were doing and the intentions of the play. Do you know, sometimes a play doesn't translate from one country to another as well,
right?
Or we bring our weird Canadianisms into it and they distort what you were trying to do. I mean, have you seen any of that sort of disconnect culturally?
I mean, other than the accents, not really. I mean, it's just but it's not like that when they're working, the accents, I mean, that's really the only thing I notice. But when they're working, you know, most of the time I don't even notice it. And also it's very believable. This could be anywhere in America. This could be upper Midwest and it wouldn't be like super far off, right? Yes. They're right across the river from you.
Well, this could be Canada. I mean, honestly, these things do happen in Canada, not as often in the US, but we've had some pretty horrific incidents like this in Canada.
Yeah, it's very easy for us down here going through all we're going through to like look up to Canada, some socialist panacea, and like in a lot of ways comparably, frankly, than the healthcare situation alone kind of is in some ways. But just in terms of like you have an option, that's nice. But I know you all have your problem. I mean, I know the gun culture like is a very interesting and different thing there than it is here. But you guys had all those like crazy truck convoys and stuff up there too. So you're getting your own doses of what we're going through.
I've always said that Canada follows whatever the US is doing with about a 6-year delay.
Yeah, that tracks. That makes sense.
You know, we're just a little slower to latch onto these things, but we will.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly there are cultural differences between Canada and the US, absolutely. But I think that the isolation is something everybody can relate to. Since we all just went through and are continuing in degrees to go through COVID isolation. I just found out this morning I got directly exposed by my coworker like yesterday. Yeah, so I'm just, you know, now I'm just like, great, time to swab the old nose again, you know. So it's one of those things where I feel like everybody can relate, and everybody can kind of relate to the sort of fear and reactionary ways that people are behaving, I think are really throughout this play that have kind of just continued and keep going. And and sort of what can happen when you're getting your information from maybe not the best sources.
Yeah.
Because I do think Lydia is misinformed
Yeah. Well, and I think
in
also,
certain ways.
yeah, I think so. But also, I think people will be able to relate to Lydia, no matter how unlike Lydia they are, because even if their family hasn't experienced this sort of trouble, this sort of breakdown and estrangement, I think any parent can relate to the fear of it,
Oh, absolutely.
you know, and that feeling of helplessness and powerlessness and desperation when your child needs something and you can't provide it and no one else seems to even want to try.
Oh, I think I can't imagine. I'm not a parent. I know some of my best friends are parents, but I myself am not a parent. Um, and I love their kids to death, and I'd do anything for them. But I can't imagine what it's like to just have your child walking around this earth and feeling like the world is kind of out to get them.
Hmm.
And that's, I think, how she feels, is that there's references to him being bullied because he's different.
Hmm.
And I mean, anybody who's been bullied can tell you that that's walking the gauntlet to school every day. It's unbearable. It's
Yeah.
hard to get on that bus.
Yeah.
Everybody can relate to that,
Yeah.
who's been through that situation. And watching that happen to your kid just must be, I get angry when I hear about my niece getting bullied.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
Yeah.
not her biological auntie, but I'm her auntie. And yeah, if anybody looks at her funny, I get defensive. So I can't imagine what it would be like, being a parent in that situation. There's something wrong. And yeah, it seems like not only does nobody care, but the world is like actively out to make his life miserable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is that conflux of emotions and that conflux of of perceptions is something that anyone who's not only been a parent can relate to, but who's had a younger person they cared about, like you say, a niece or a nephew, or even a little neighbor kid or something like that,
Yeah.
we've all been in those kinds of situations. Well, not all, most of us, I
Yeah.
think. I wanted to ask you about uh, your process, because we run an annual playwriting contest, and we work with a lot of playwrights, and I'm always trying to get material out there for people who are interested in writing plays, or who are struggling with the process, or are doubting themselves, to learn about other people's processes and what other people do. Do you have something that you would call your process for writing?
Well, it's really funny because my process for every single play has been different to an extent, but I think that the three sort of things I always rely on are.
So we were interrupted by a phone call, which happens in the Zoom era. But before that, I was asking you about your process, and you were saying that the process is always different for you, but there are three elements that all of your processes seem to have in common.
Yeah, it was one is a big one for me is imagery. There's usually an image in the play or an image I've seen somewhere else that sticks with me and it floats around in my head. I look at visual art a lot,
Mm-hmm.
to just get pictures in my head. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they don't mean anything, and sometimes they do, or sometimes they don't come up in the play at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, but I'm always images. Also, music is really important for me. I usually listen to music when I write. I listen to music constantly. And sometimes it'll just be a line in the song or something that kicks it off. And then the third thing is, and I think that this is part of my process that I was trying to like ignore because it makes life harder, but I write longhand a lot.
Oh yeah.
And I'm kind of back to it now. And it's annoying because then you have to transcribe everything, but I think
I,
that because we've all spent so much time in front of the computer, that the computer is not my creative space now.
mm-hmm.
So I've had to kind of like redefine creative space for me. And that's sitting with my headphones looking surly, like scribbling on the subway, or, sitting in coffee shops like I used to when I was a teenager. Like I'm really trying to get back to that.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. Before, I started having trouble with my vision, I would write my first draft of everything in longhand. everything. I just thought better that way than I did on a keyboard. But I found the process of taking that and putting it into a computer became the first part of editing, and it ended up being a really helpful part of the process. Also, like you, I listen to music, and I haven't done this since the pandemic started, but I used to create a new playlist for every writing project. And so I would listen to the playlist for that project. When the project was over, I'd destroy the playlist.
Wow.
I don't know if that's bizarre, but that's what I used to
No,
do.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I usually make playlists for every show. I've done the pre-show for a lot of my shows. I love doing that. I love like
Yeah.
matching up a playlist to the themes of the play, or
I love
how I
doing
want the
it too.
play to feel. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
We'll have to collaborate for this one.
I've got started. So yeah, we should get together and collaborate on that, because I'd love to have your input on that. I think it would be really interesting. And we might come up with all sorts of things that we wouldn't have thought of individually, which is always part of the fun of collaboration, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, before I let you go, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, what makes a Kari Bentley-Quinn play?
Oh.
Like, what if someone characterize your body of work?
Yep.
How would they?
Yep. I should have an answer ready for this. I should. I don't think you're ever going to find a true villain in one of my plays.
You mean
because
somebody that isn't sympathetic in some way?
Yeah, I don't think that there's ever going to. I mean, you could probably you might feel that way, but there's never going to be a time in the play where they're not a human being. And I think that I try to approach things from like every conceivable angle when I can. I think all of my plays have that in common. Also, it will probably get sad at some point. No, and I mean, I will, and also I do tend to have women characters at the center of my play also. It's unusual that isn't the case. It's something that's important to me, that men and women get equal stage time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the ladies get a little more in my world. Yeah. Yeah, we started a women's monologue contest earlier this year. One of the reasons was that there's a local playwright who was asked to find a monologue for an actress, and realized there are very few good monologues for women. So she just wrote a book of 100 monologues. And so we've created a monologue competition based on her book. But also with us, I mean, this works out really well, because we are constantly looking for plays that primarily feature female characters, good female characters, because in our region, in Windsor, Essex, the female versus to male ratio amongst actors is decidedly in favor of the females. So yeah, we just have much better options to choose from, and many more options to choose from if we choose female-oriented plays, which works out for us anyway. It's great. That's great. I found recently we were looking at. I was looking for a different project for a gift. I was looking for a bunch of plays. I wanted to buy a bunch of plays and give them as a gift. And what I ended up doing as one of my sort of limitations or limit criteria for this project was excluding most plays from before 1970, because my God, there's so little for women to do in most plays from before around that time. It's yep. Yeah. Yes. I'm a little over the old revivals at this point. I'm like, let's investigate the 80s, the 90s. Can we do the 90s? Can we? No, but yeah, no, I mean, it's absolutely true. I mean, of course, there are the iconic legendary roles, of course, but it's not all Blanche and Streetcar out there. Right. Pre 1970, so it's, I mean, even finding, a play that has two female characters who both have agency Yeah. Yeah. Never mind the Bechdel test. Like you can't
right.
even. Yeah. Yeah.
So good. We need more playwrights like you out there, right?
Well,
And
we're
there are.
trying. We're out
There's,
here. We're out here trying.
yeah. And there's been in the last 20, 30 years, there's been a lot more good work, right? Not only featuring, good female characters, interesting female characters, but by female playwrights,
Yeah.
which is good. And I think some older female playwrights are being rediscovered, who might have been ignored in, say, university programs and that sort of thing,
Yes.
until
There were
recently.
a lot of, and there were a lot of them that people
Yeah,
just don't know a darn thing about. I
yeah.
mean, tons.
What was that? Faye and I read a really great play recently, from the 20s called Machino. Is that it? Yes. Machino.
Oh, yes.
That's fascinating.
I know who wrote that play. Why can't I
Yeah,
think of it?
I know. I used to. I knew
I'm
2
gonna
months
lose my
ago.
theater card now. Look what you did.
2 months ago, I could have told you wrote it, but it's gone now. Anyway, I heard of it, but never read it.
Sophie Treadwell. God,
Thank
I
you.
knew that
Sophie
name.
Treadwell. Yes, that is a fascinating play, and when you consider that it was written by a woman in the 1920s, that must have been absolutely jaw-dropping to people, when that came out. But even now, it really oddly resonates pretty well.
And one of my favorite playwrights also from the 20s is Susan Glaspell, who was a colleague of Eugene O'Neill, and they wrote plays together at Provincetown Players for years. She wrote some excellent plays, and I mean, she was O'Neill adjacent, and I mean, she's being studied much more by scholars now.
I don't think I've
But
heard her. What would you recommend to start with?
Trifles is her most famous play. I would start there. It's a one act, and it's really terrific.
Okay.
And she was really ahead of her time with female characters as well. I mean, obviously women, writing female characters in that time is going to be different.
Mhm.
And her work, I wrote a paper in grad school about how her work was in conversation with O'Neill. They wrote on some similar themes, and yeah, she's definitely worth investigating too. She had a pretty substantial body of work.
Yeah. I mean, you went into into playwriting, and I wanted to go into theater, in university when I was young, but my grandparents were very, very much against it. They wanted me to do something practical, so I went into philosophy. But I ended up coming back into theater. And
my husband's an academic, so.
yeah. But why was I talking about that? Oh, it was in philosophy, we have the exact same sort of phenomenon where there are women through the centuries who have really good work and substantial work, and sometimes a substantial body of work, but you wouldn't have heard of them in philosophy programs until recently. And they're there, and people in their time were writing about them and talking about them and so forth, but history decided to ignore them until recently. Mm-hmm. It's good that these are being uncovered.
Yeah, most women weren't considered canon, so it's kind of that simple. Yeah, and that's why I'm against the canon. I'm like, we need a new canon. We need to at least update the canon.
At the very least, update the canon. Yes.
Yeah.
I think in most disciplines, we need to update the canon.
Canon needs updating. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Kari. And
thank you.
Appreciate you talking with me today. And we will see you because you're coming out to see one of the performances on July 1st. Is that correct?
I'm there July 1st and 2nd. So I'm going to try to catch them all. I'm going to try to catch them both.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Have a great day.
You too.